Okay, hey Adam. I tried to open the file you sent me and there was nothing in it, so it was like it was corrupted or something. I don't know what the problem was with that, but it opened up into a blank document. So I'm just going to kind of go with this, starting from scratch, which is, I'm assuming it's kind of what you did, and probably some of what I'm about to do you've already done. So be a little patient with me if that's the case. So it's something like the Hulk. Basically, you want to think about it's a human figure, and we're made up. Basically, if we're going to be using these primitive shapes, you want to think about, okay, we're made up of cylinders. Our arms are cylinders, mostly, and we're made up of probably spheres and maybe a few squares in there. But some variation of those three things will cover a lot of trying to model a human figure. And the Hulk's just a big, bulky human figure. And we're just going to put shapes together to kind of, these aren't going to be realistic. They're going to be way more stylized, and that's okay. And that's, if you can really make it stylized and make it work, that's even better. If you don't worry about trying to make it too realistic, I think you'll be fine, because I couldn't make it super realistic, and because we're working with primitives, I kind of tried, and there's only so much you can do with these primitive shapes. Now we're going to learn later on how to manipulate them and do more realistic stuff. So at the end, once you kind of get the hang of that, you could come back and work on this some if you wanted to. But the first thing I'm going to do is kind of start out with the torso, or the lower body, and I'm just going to use a sphere for that. So I'll click up here in the little top left on the polygons and click on sphere, and it puts a sphere right in the center. So then I'm going to grab my move tool, which is over here on the toolbar, and I get my manipulators, and I'm just going to move it. It's right on the middle of the ground there. This darker line here, that's the ground plane that you're seeing right here. So I'm going to grab the green arrow, I'm going to shift that up, and I'm looking at a side view here, a front view here, a top view here, and a perspective view here. In perspective, I can I can command key on a Mac. I'm not sure what that key command is on a Windows machine. It's the one, for me, it's the one right by the space bar, but on a Windows machine, it might be Control. It's one of those, Control or Alt or something like that. That, and then with a left click on the mouse, you can rotate around the shape. Okay, so I've got what's going to be, I guess, the bottom of the torso. The next thing I'm going to think about is, okay, what kind of shape blends in with that circle to create like the lower torso, like the stomach area. And I could do another circle or another sphere, but really a cylinder is our best option for that shape, because our bodies are, again, cylindrical. So we can create a cylinder and just drag it up, and it's about the same width, and I just kind of look at that with nothing selected, and it starts to look like, the bottom of a single solid shape. What I might want to do is use my scale tool over here, and I might want to, in the side view, click on the scale tool, sorry, here, I might want to decrease a little bit so we get a little bit more of like the butt there, and we can move this forward a little bit so it's not quite such a stiff shape. Okay, so that's the start, and now we want to think about like the chest area. Now the Hulk is all upper body and lower legs, so he's got that great big giant V shape created by those muscles there. So look at a couple things, and I could do a circle, would be one way to do it. And I could say, okay, let's make that bigger up at the top and get my scale tool. And I'll do this in the front view here, grab it at the top and just stretch it up that way a little bit. And then stretch the width of it, and that's probably way too much. So I'll come down a little bit. And so now it's starting to kind of feel like that big upper chest mass there. And I'll scale it a little bit more front to back. and maybe that's going to work. I'm not sure. And maybe I can shrink it down a little bit and flatten it. And I can also move it around and reposition it just as I need it. Okay. So now I want to think about, okay, he's got shoulders, and shoulders, if you kind of look at them, are just partial spheres. So I'm going to create another sphere. And I'm only going to model one side of this. I'm going to do the right side. So anything, it's going to create it in the center here. You can see that center line goes down. So I'm going to work just on this side of the center line. Because later on, everything we make on this side, we can just really quickly copy it and mirror it over to this side and save a ton of time modeling. So let's make this a shoulder. And Hulk's got great big shoulders. So I'm going to scale that pretty large, larger than I would a normal human character. And then I'm going to kind of fit that in and think about what that looks like. Does it look kind of like a human shoulder? Again, these are stylized, but think about the silhouette we have. And so, yeah, that's kind of working. I can adjust that a little bit. And so this is the top of your shoulders, and this is where the big shoulder muscles are. So these are those neck muscles that kind of lead up to here. Okay, so that would be a shoulder. And then now let's think about, okay, the upper arm on Hulk especially, it's this great, and again, another great big cylinder. So we'll create another cylinder by clicking up here at the top. And we'll drag this up. And I'll drag it side view, and I'll drag it in the front view so I can line things up really easy. And I can zoom in. And the way I'm zooming in is on my scroll button on my mouse. And that's like the center scroll button. And so that's how I'm able to zoom in on that. So, and I can also, if I want to, I can just hit the space bar and work on individual screens. So I can just position my cursor over the one I want to see, and it'll hit the space bar, and then it'll take me just to that one. So here's the front view, and let's take this, and we can use the rotate tool, and you can click on the yellow circle, rotates it parallel to the view you're in. So I can do that because I want to keep it kind of parallel. And then I can go back to my scale tool. And if I've got the green, which will scale it, if I click and drag it, it scales in that direction. Red will scale it and drag it in this direction. This blue one will do it proportional in all three directions, which is probably what we want right now. Because I can look and see it's still a perfect cylinder. So if I can do that, it'll keep it a cylinder, but it just changes the overall size. And then I can take this and start to move it in and fit that into the Hulk's upper arm. And then I can scale that to make it a little bit longer. Okay, that looks pretty good. And then I might think about where the arm sits on the body. On the Hulk, he's usually got his shoulders kind of pulled back. So I might, in the side view, select the circle and move it back a little bit. And then I might select the cylinder and move it back a little bit. So it feels a little more like the way he stands with his shoulders kind of pulled back. Okay. So the next thing is, we've done the upper arm, and these are really big giant cylinders because the Hulk's got these big huge arms, so that's what that is. And so I'll create another circle because we want something to fill in the elbow. Now I could create a cylinder and drag it up here, and I could scale it down some, and I could rotate it and move it and kind of connect, but it's not going to make a really good connection. So we kind of want to hide that both of these edges are there. And the way I like to do that is with another sphere. So I'll create another sphere, and it creates it in the middle here. And then I'll drag it up. And here it is in the front view, and then I can drag it here. And I can hit the scale tool grab the center, drag it down, and I'll probably move this out of the way for just a little bit so I can see what I'm doing, because I'm going to kind of line this up so it's about the same size as this cylinder here. And I'm going to move that, just checking all these different directions in the front view and the side view mainly, to make sure that looks kind of like it merges into that arm. So I click off, that looks like it merges in pretty good. I can shrink it down a little bit. And again, I'm not, I know I'm not going to be able to get anything super realistic, but I want to give the, it's again a stylized version of this character, or anything we're actually doing in this assignment is a stylized version of the thing somebody's trying to make. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And that way we can take this cylinder and start to get it in position. And I looked at a lot of photos of the Hulk before I started this, and so you want to have your photos handy somehow, either on screen or in an open window, somewhere that you can check between and make sure you're paying attention to the anatomy and stuff, and like just the main landmarks on the body. So I'm going to go to the top here, the top view, and kind of position that. Okay. And then I can make that a little bit longer, and because the forearm tapers off, I can scale that down a little bit so it feels more natural. Okay, so that feels more like the way the arm kind of tapers there. And I might go here and rotate that a little bit and give it a little bit of a pose, because Hulk, a lot of the time he has his arms bent like that, and a character looks more natural with a bent arm. So I'm going to adjust that size, because we still got to come and do a hand later. But here, if I look, I'm starting to see that's starting to look like a human form using these really simple shapes. Okay, now for like the Hulk's neck, you could use a cone or a cylinder, and that would work. And give him a big, thick neck. And scale that down a little bit, and that would work fine. And put a head on top of that. But in the pictures, a lot of the reference stuff I looked at, the Hulk has a smaller head than his body, so his neck kind of tapers. It starts out really thick and tapers a little bit smaller. So for that, something like this cone would be good. So I'm going to create a cone. It's going to create in the center, and I'm going to drag it up, and it's going to stay in the center there, so everything still stays symmetrical. But that also helps to kind of finish off that shape where the neck connects with the shoulders. In the side view, I can see that, okay, it's kind of straight up. Now the Hulk, he's always got his head bent forward a little bit, so I can go in and rotate that a little bit and see how this pops out of the shape back here. So we start to lose that silhouette. So what I want to do is take that and just scoot it forward a little bit so it pops back in and blends in better. Okay. Alright, so now we've got the upper torso really simply shaped out, the arms and all that, and then you always want to go back and look at your proportions, and things may need to change a little bit. That arm looks a little long, so I might want to adjust that. And if I adjust that, I then have to move that a little bit, but that's okay. It's to be expected working in 3D to have to kind of change and adjust a lot. Okay, so there's that. Now, a couple things you could do to create the head. The obvious thing is to use a sphere and put it up there. Okay, so it's up about the right height. It might be a little large, so I'm going to scale it down a little bit so it looks proportionate to the Hulk's head, to his body. And then I'm going to bring it down a little bit. In the side view, I want to go and I want to bring it forward. Okay, so it looks like the base of the neck is connecting to the skull up here. Okay, so then I can do that. Okay. Now, so you could do that, and you could just leave it at that shape and make that work. But you know, if you think about the skull's this round parts at the top of the skull, but at the bottom, about where your jaw is, it becomes more like a little square bit here. So what I think I might do here is do a two-part skull, and that cylinder has this kind of squared off edge at the bottom. So I'll create a cylinder and scale that down. And maybe squash it down a little bit and move it in here. And rotate it a little bit so it looks like he's got a jaw there. Okay, so that's a little more natural form for the head. Okay, so maybe that's what I'm going to do. Okay, but now I like that, so maybe I want to change his skull. And this is all up to you. You can do whatever you want to do, or whatever you think looks best. So you don't have to do anything the way I'm doing it or anyone else might do it. It's all ultimately up to you. But I'm going to create this cylinder because maybe in this he's going to be stylized to be a little more square. Okay, so that still looks like a head there, like the top part of the skull. Pull that forward. So in the side view, that's still looking a lot like a skull, which is what we want. And this would be his jaw. And we can go in and shrink that a little bit, distort it a little bit. And maybe we'll move his head forward a little bit more. And we could go in and rotate it down so he's got a little more attitude. Okay. And then in the front view here, we can see his jaw's a little bit thinner than it is, so we could go in and stretch that to kind of make it merge in with like his cheeks a little bit more. So now in the side view, we've got the big Hulk head and the big hulking body. Now for a nose, you could think about, okay, the nose is kind of a cone shape. So maybe we could use a cone for that. And drag it and move it. And scale it with the scale tool. And I'll move it from the center so it scales it all proportionally. And then I'll take it and position it. And that's really too big of a nose for the Hulk, right? His nose isn't that big and pointy, unless you want it to be, I guess. So I'll move it in a little bit more, and I might turn it up a little bit. So that could be the Hulk nose. What I can also do is I can take it and make it a little bit thinner, which fits the shape of the face a little bit more. But I can also use another sphere, create that. Again, it creates it down here, so I've got to move that up here. Get my scale tool and scale it down, and I can move it into place. And then I might move his nose, this part of the nose, back a little bit more. Excuse me. And it looks like it's a little low on his head. Like it looks too low to me. It's almost in his mouth. So I'm going to bring that up a little bit And then I'm going to bring that up a little bit. Move that back. And maybe even scale that up a little bit more. Because in the front view here, we're getting a good kind of nose shape. And we're getting a pretty good nose shape here in the side view. I can adjust that a little bit more. Okay, so that's good. And then if you think about the nostrils are really just kind of partial spheres, so we can kind of make that work. I can select the nose, and I can create, or actually go to Edit, and go to Duplicate, or it's a key command. It's going to be probably Control or Alt D. It'll put a copy right here on top of the other one, but I can then get my Move tool, move it over, get my Scale tool, and start to scale it into place there. Okay, so we're starting to create the shape that really looks like a nose. Now on the side I can see it's too far forward, so maybe I'll go and I'll scale it and stretch it back a little bit so it goes back kind of into his face here, so it looks more like it's connecting with the rest of the cheek. Okay. And then we could go in and work on, okay, so everybody's got in the brow above the nose, there's that little part in the middle, like when you scowl, you've got that little part in the middle. So what I can do is I can go in and I can, again, think about what I want to use for that, and I can use a circle or a sphere. And you can use a sphere for a lot of things here, so that's why I'm using them so much. But they're good for like the human forms and the more organic forms. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to move it up here. And think about that little part of the brow when you furrow your brow, that little part in the middle. And then think about what that silhouette looks like, whether it looks good like a human silhouette. I'm going to adjust it a little bit. Maybe bring it out. Okay, now I want to do the brows. So then what I can do is I know that I can use a sphere. And so I could take this sphere and select it and do Edit, Duplicate, and then put it right here. And then I can rotate that into place. And I can stretch that with the Scale tool and stretch it this way. And I'll have to move it a little bit. And maybe I need to widen that a little bit. Take it from the front view. Still looks a little weird. So what I might need to do is go in from the top and rotate it some and then move it inward so it just kind of sits inside the brow there a little bit. And I might need to scale it around some more and play around with that just to see what it looks like, or what looks good on all sides. And I might need to keep changing the rotation on it a little bit here and there. And just changing the scale until I get something that I like. Okay, but now he's got a brow. He's got that good strong brow that the Hulk has. Move that up a little. And I'm looking at the silhouette and that looks pretty good. Okay, so we'll stop there and let's move on down to the leg a little bit, but you can kind of go from there what I'm doing. I'm just taking these little smaller shapes and trying to build all the other shapes. So now let's think about the upper leg on this side. And really, if you think about your upper leg, it's really just a big elongated sphere. So let's do that. And the Hulk is kind of short and squat, but he's thick. So we won't stretch it too much. Then I'll bring it over and think about, okay, it needs to sit somewhat on this side of the line, because again, humans are symmetrical. So we can do that, and then we can rotate it a little bit. Maybe scale it down a little bit. And move it up into where it joins into the torso. Okay, and then Hulk is always kind of squatting down and bent, so maybe I'll bend this a little bit forward. So he's like he's bent down and he's putting his weight on his leg. Okay. Now we can do, the bottom lower part of the leg's the same thing. So we could just duplicate that. Edit, duplicate, and we can move it. And it's going to be a little bit smaller because the leg's tapering off. Oops, wrong one. Grab the blue one to taper everything or to shrink it all the same degree. Okay, in the front view, just the way, if I look at some of the images, and I can't get out of the recording to do the images, but if you're flipping back as you're working, looking at your images, you'd see that standing like that, this bottom part of the leg is going to do something like that from the front. And from the side, obviously it's going to bend at the knee and go back like that because of the way he's bent. Okay. And right now, if I look over here, he still looks too tall for the Hulk. The Hulk is more short, and so, well, he's not short, but he's squattier. So what I want to do before I get too much further is go in and shrink up this part of the torso and maybe drag that up so he feels a little more compact. And then I can take this up and this up. Okay, and looking at my torso, that looks more like the Hulk's shape, right? His head's still needs a little work still, but we can jump back and forth on stuff like that pretty easy. So maybe there's that. And what I can also do is, okay, so that's a pretty good shape, but we're kind of missing the knee. So I can go in and create another sphere, take it, put it right where the knee would be, and shrink it down. And then I can bring it forward and kind of fit it in there as a kneecap. And shrink that and bring it forward. Maybe change its position a little bit. And maybe shrink it a little more in this direction. Okay, so without that, it looks okay. That would be all right for me. But you can just go in and just that little bit of extra detail with that shape helps to make that look more like a leg. You get that little bit of indentation where the kneecap is. Now we could continue on with that and think about, okay, well, Hulk's got these great big giant muscles, so he's got these great big giant calf muscles. And so maybe right now we've got a good calf muscle here. So maybe I can create another duplicate of that one. This time I'm going to shrink it down a little bit. And I'm going to move it around. Maybe stretch it some. And move it around. So that now he's got a calf muscle there. We can see that a little bit of that shape there. We can see it here. As we rotate it around, we can start to see some of that. But we can still go in and resize things to make that more prominent if we want. And I'm going to kind of rotate that so this here lines up a little cleaner. But see, now we've got that good big giant Hulk calf muscle. And I'll move this a little bit here so it's bigger on the inside there. Move that a little bit. So now we've got something on his leg that looks a lot more muscular. Okay, so that's, the degree that you want to do that is up to you. Like, you could do the same thing in his arm here to get that big muscle in the forearm. Okay, so that's the basics of what we're doing with this assignment and how you might start. So you could take it and you could go from there. Let's see, let's take this and get that out of the way real quick. I want to show you another one. So here's a version of it I worked out earlier before I started recording this. And so here he is. I'm going to move him up here on top of the plane. But again, it's the same idea. Let's get rid of this guy over here. Let's hide him. Do display show or hide selection. And some little extra stuff I was playing around there. Let's get rid of that. Or actually, let's leave that for a second. But we'll put it way down here. So I was using the same technique. Again, there's that extra sphere, and so there's the calf and the bottom part of the leg. And then I added here just another cylinder to again kind of make that a little more complex shape, just the way the bottom of the leg is. You can do that or you can do without that. It's kind of just what you want to do. And again, here's the elbow for the knee, upper body. And for the head, what I did was, like, to get ears, I could have just done one sphere. And what that is that's a sphere that I just squashed really flat and put it there and rotated it so it looks like an ear. And that was okay. But then some ears have like that more prominent bottom lobe. So I just made a copy of that and kind of got it, to kind of merge up with that. And now we've got a more complex ear. There's the nose and the brow again. What I did here to get the top of the eyelids and the bottom, I just made a torus shape like that guy and put it again from the front view, kind of positioned it where I wanted it. There's a camera there for some reason, and oh, that's this camera. I'm going to go to show, and well, I'm not sure right now how to turn that off and get it out of our way. There we go. But basically what I did was just position this in the left and right so it would be like the top of your eyelids. And the torus is a really good shape for that because it's round, and it's round on the side view, but it's also round from the top, and it kind of mirrors the way your eyelids work. So I gave him an eyelid, and then I went ahead and did another sphere inside to give him his eyeball. And I did 3 different cylinder shapes for the head just to be a little more complex with it. You don't have to. And then I gave him, sometimes the Hulk has a crew cut, and with this type of modeling, just these primitives, that's a pretty easy haircut to give him. Or you could just make him bald, or like really closely cropped hair, however you wanted to do that. And the last thing to show you is, we're trying to simplify the process of making all this stuff. So there's a good way, like when you work on half of the model, once you've gotten that where you want it, what you can do is you can if you click and drag and select it on those parts, anywhere it touches, it makes a selection of that. If you want to do them individually, you could do that and then hold down Shift and then click. Shift and click will let you click on multiple objects, but also you can click and drag if that's easier. But once you've got those selected, if you go up here to the polygon tab and look right here at this, it's got an axis and a shape and another shape. That's the mirror tool. If I click on that, it mirrors them along the center axis. So that cuts your modeling time in half if you plan it out. So if this arm were complete, I could select it and mirror that. Same up here. I can select his ears, both of them, and mirror. Now he's got ears on the other side of his head. You can see those here. This nostril needs a mirror, so I can select it and mirror it. There's that. And his eye and his eyelids need mirrors. So I'm getting a much more complete figure now. But what you want to do is wait until you've finished all those shapes, I guess. Okay. So that's kind of the approach you could take. And also, if you wanted to, if you just wanted to make them out of like squares and hard edges, these are some squares. This is a pyramid shape. But, you know, this is the start of the Hulk. Again, it's the same basic form. It's the lower torso, the stomach area, the upper chest right here, leg. You can use those harder edge shapes like the rectangle and the pyramid. And you can also draw a cylinder. Okay, so if you've got a cylinder, select it over here in the channel box. You may have to click that to show it. On the right, it's channel box. If you click that, on inputs you'll see polycylinder. When you create it, it creates a name for it, what it is. So with that selected, you'll see polycylinder, whatever number cylinder it is. If you click that, you can, your subdivision axis, that's how many times the shape is divided to get that roundness of that shape. So right now it's divided 20 times. If I make that 5 times, okay, I get a shape with a much harder edge. It's not rounded out. 6 times. So you can have a hexagon at 5. You could even do a 4 and have a tall cube. And you could even do a 3 for that axis to change it, to get more variation in your shapes. Okay, so I hope this is helpful. Again, the idea is that we're just taking all these shapes and trying to put them together, and sometimes it takes more smaller shapes to really get the look you're after. But you know, they don't have to look realistic. We're going for a very stylized look, and all of these that everybody's doing are going to be really stylized, and that's perfectly fine. That's kind of the artistic aspect of all this that we're trying to do here. I want everybody to be able to kind of do what they want and kind of figure out their style and kind of make these things really their own. All right, so hopefully that helps, Adam, and if you have any questions, just give me another shout and I'll try to help you as much as I can. Thanks.